Thanks, Nate. Welcome, all of you guys. Got to meet some of you and chat with some of you last night. And some of you I have a few of my former students here. So if you hear anyone kind of going, Psh, yeah, right, it's probably one of my former students. But hopefully we can avoid too much of that. So as Nate mentioned, I'm going to talk about the vocation of teaching. Teaching as a professional vocation. And I'll break up the talk into three categories. First, what does it mean to have a vocation? Secondly, what does the vocation of teaching look like? And that will be sort of the lengthiest portion of my talk. And then a quick, third section on how to know, how to discern. In your shoes, you're either a few years out from graduating or a year out from graduating from college, or you're in another profession and considering a career change. So how to discern whether to make that leap. So a few notes on just about vocation. I think the most important thing to say is that the call comes before the answer, as obvious as that is. But I want to say it that way because it distinguishes it from us really making this choice. It is a choice. You do need to, make an act of will and decide, okay, I'm going to do this. But not to give ourselves too much credit for that, because it is an answer. It is a response. It is the call that exists first. And therefore, we have to acknowledge the presence of the caller and know that vocation is something that comes to us largely through, when we say discernment, it's through prayer and through a lot of contemplation and thinking. Everyone has a vocation. If you go into our chapel and look on the back altar, right below the tabernacle, there's the Latin inscription, Ego vocavite, I have called you. Every boy sees that when they go into the chapel. Each of them is called. And so that's important. It's not something that's just reserved for the religious. It's not something that's just for teachers. Everyone has a vocation. Secondly, everyone has a vocation to teach. The final words of the Gospel of Matthew are, go and teach all nations. Go make disciples of all nations. Those are final words of the Gospel of Matthew. So all of us has the vocation to teach. The question then is, for what you guys are here for, is do I have the vocation to teach professionally? And that's what we're going to talk about today. Because a little bit of, in terms of what Alvaro was talking about yesterday, and I know some of the speakers who are coming are going to talk about, we teach no matter where we are in whatever station in life, particularly if we're fathers as well. But professionally, well, it's difficult to talk about vocation because vocation is, by its essence, mysterious and singular. It is extremely and completely personal. So there's no sort of, formula that I can lay out or that anyone can lay out to say, follow these steps and you'll figure out exactly whether you have a vocation teaching. It's completely inside of you, that voice, whether you're going to hear it, what it is. When Cardinal Ratzinger was asked on the spot how many paths there are to God, he immediately said, as many as there are people. So each of us has a vocation. Each of us has a singular vocation. And so in that way, it's a mysterious thing to talk about. Also, vocations unfold slowly over time, typically. We are not all, going to have the St. Paul treatment or the Ebenezer Scrooge treatment. It's not always an overnight thing. It starts to unfold slowly, and you hear it quietly. Mine began when I was 18. I was at my graduation party at high school, and I was having a conversation with who was a good friend and spiritual director of mine, Father Arnie Panula, and it was him who first mentioned, he said, I think you could be a teacher. And, it was totally blindsided me. I hadn't thought about it at all. Hadn't thought about really careers, period, senior in high school. But that was the first sort of sowing of that seed. And it took a while to germinate, but it unfolds. It's not something that I knew right then, as a senior in high school. Well, of course, I'm going to be a teacher. It unfolds, and then at one point, typically vocation, there's a spark that really makes everything combust and makes it clear. And I'll talk about that a little bit more down the road. So only you can hear this call. Only I can hear my call, my vocation. That's important to talk about. Okay, so but what does the vocation of teaching look like? We could be here a long time talking about that. Some of the leaders of other schools know it would be silly for me to stand up here and say that I plan to give you an exhaustive picture of what the profession of teaching looks like. I can't do that because it is such a big job. And so I think each of us over the next few hours and days will try to color in as much of that picture as possible to give you a sense, to know what you're looking at. So I try to just give a quick taste, a few things, a few elements of what the profession looks like. And I'll talk about sort of, you'll find as you teach that you wear many hats. You're not just, a teacher. And so I'm going to talk about a few of those hats that you're going to wear as a professional teacher, and not just what the task entails, but the challenges that go along with that. It would be unfair to kind of get up here and just paint the picture of rose-colored glasses and saw a big walk in the park. That would be unfair to you guys because it's not true. But then also talk about the joys, because there are many. So the first task that I'll talk about as being a teacher is that of a conductor. These are largely going to be metaphorical, by the way, and not super practical. And I was thinking we can get to the practical in the Q&A, and hopefully this informs some of the practical things that you're thinking about. But a teacher is a conductor of an orchestra. We have to set the tone. We need to step into a room and be able to do what a conductor does when he steps onto a stage. And, they have all these different instruments, different groups, different cliques. They're all making strange noises. And then with a quick flick of his wrist, everyone calls to, puts the instruments to their mouths at attention. A teacher needs to be able to do that. And it's going to be in different ways per teacher. And sometimes every day is going to be a little bit different depending on what you teach. I teach storytelling to 45 third graders at a time. And, I'll do, every once in a while, I'll do this thing where I kind of put my hands at this level and they know they have to hum. And then I'll raise it and the hum becomes almost a scream. And then it goes back down. And they'll do this for about 30 seconds, right? And then I'll wipe it away and they'll go dead silent. That doesn't work for my juniors. They would think I was really weird if I tried that with my juniors for moral theology. But, maybe different things. Calling out somebody really loud. Hey, Nate, button your top button. Okay, let's go. And you find your own tricks. You find your own ways to raise the baton and quickly get everyone at attention. And then it's not just that, but then as you lead the class, how you can keep the song moving. The best teachers know how to keep a class moving even when there's some disruption. and maybe it's a little bit of a quick movement over here, but the train keeps moving, the song keeps playing. It's not a big stop and stall. The bad teachers stop everything. They make big deals out of everything, and it's a lot of this all the way through the class. A good teacher knows how to keep it moving, as a conductor does through the songs. The challenges of this is that, well, we usually are dealing with large numbers of other human beings. This would be really easy if we had 2 or 3. If you try teaching a class to 3 or 4 students, and then try teaching a class to 30 students or 40 students, and obviously that number difference is one of the, that's the difference right there. It doesn't take a great teacher to be able to keep silence and keep the train moving with 3 or 4 students, but with 30, 40, it's a challenge. There's noise. They're noisy. They want to be talking with each other. They're not coming in already sold as to what you're selling, right? They're not already in it. So you've got to win them over. It's one of the challenges. And I'd say another challenge to that element is, Alvaro mentioned yesterday, just briefly, just how distracted the students are. And whether that's on increase, I think we would all agree that that's on the rise of distractibility. They're trained outside of the classrooms to be passively entertained. And so to put them in a place where they need to be actively engaged intellectually, it's a hard sell. So that's a challenge, and it's a difficult thing. The joys, though, of this is that distractibility has formed, and their age has formed this sort of thick crust. But once you break through that, you can hit really, really deep. That's one of the greatest joys of teaching. And whether that's, I don't know whether that's particular to now teaching today rather as opposed to 50 years ago. But there's this big surface layer. If you can penetrate through that, and sometimes you can do it with a whole class and man, you're in, but that's rare. But often you can do it with a few individuals or most of the class. And if you can penetrate underneath that layer with a good lesson plan, a good delivery, a good message, making your heart, and all these things are intertwined that we're going to be talking about here. But if you can get past that layer and hit them, it makes a big impact. I remember, you can, again, there's different tricks that you learn and different things that you put in your tool belt as you go through your career as a teacher. And my juniors were just kind of not following along. I said, all right, guys, I got something for you. I challenge you to make a story in 6 words. And I bet you I can do it. And they all try, and they, no, this is impossible, sir. You can't do it. It took about 10 minutes of class. I'm trying. And I said, no, I can do it. Ready? For sale, baby shoes, never worn. And the look on these 17-year-old faces was like each of them had just been punched in the gut. And out of their sort of superficial, distracted malaise came this sense of awe and catharsis, right? I didn't have to tell them right then that I stole that from Hemingway. I could tell them that, a week from now. That's not important. But that you can get through that layer and hit them really deep is a great joy of teaching. We had the 4th grade on a hike up Old Rag, which is a fantastic mountain, and it's a challenging mountain down in Virginia. And we got them up to the top, and it's one of the most beautiful views, really, on the East Coast. And 45 or so of these 4th graders, and there's some other people at the summit, And faculty told the guys, okay, we're going to spend 10 minutes totally silent, just looking around. No words, don't sit next to one of your friends. And so they did it in a full 10 minutes, just looking around. Some of them closed their eyes, most of them had them open, just looking around. And it was funny, a lot of the other people up on the mountain were just going around taking pictures of these kids being totally silent. But at the end, what was great, I was not sure what the reaction was going to be, but most of them came up to the teacher and said, "Sir, that was awesome. That was unbelievable." These kids who are used to loud entertainment, big stimuli all the time, were so struck by that moment of silent contemplation. If you can break through that surface layer, it's a real joy to be able to witness that. Those of us who are fathers can see that sometimes in our children, but as teachers, you get to see it more regularly. The second task is that of a storyteller. This does not just mean, I do teach a class called storytelling, but I don't just mean in the class of storytelling, or even in just literature or even history. All subjects, teachers can be a storyteller. And we talk about that a lot in the lower school when I'm talking with my teachers. How do we tell stories? How do we work in stories more to each of our subjects, to natural history, to math? How do we do that? How do we work it in? I know Michael Moynihan might be talking about this a little bit later, so I won't spend too much time on it. But to literally transport them, well, figuratively transport them, but to, in their minds, in their imagination, bring them to another place. I didn't like reading when I was a younger student. I fell in love with it in high school. And I remember reading Old Man and the Sea. Wow, Hemingway's getting a lot of love here. I remember reading Old Man and the Sea in one sitting. And after, those few hours, it's a short book, after a few hours, put it down, looked around, where am I? What is this chair that I'm sitting on? I mean, we've all had that experience. We've been lost. We've been sucked into this work of art. Could be a painting, but stories have this particular power to transport. And if you can tap into that and utilize that as a teacher, well, that forgives so many sins. That takes care of so many potential pitfalls, discipline-wise, lesson planning, delivery. If we can learn to teach not just as, the typical way we think of teachers teaching, with their backs to the students, and the Charlie Brown adult voice, wah, 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 writing a bunch of notes on the board. Fulton Sheen famously said that too much of today's education is information traveling from the board of the teacher to the notebook of the student without passing through the mind of either. And that's true, because we're not tapping in. A lot of teachers just write down and expect that what they say, no matter how they say it, or what they write down, no matter how they organize it, that's just going to, press save, and each of the students is going to have it. Now, we have there's the need to win them over. Mind, heart, right? They both got to be plugged in. And telling a story is a great way to do that. One of the challenges to this is, and this isn't so much specific to storytelling as it is to just the entire profession, that you don't really see the results of this profession all that much. I mean, you do every once in a while, but it's rare. It's a long game. Telling stories, okay, you'll see it you'll see the fruit of their attention. You won't necessarily see the impact of their learning or the full fruit of that story. Because, I think Old Man in the Sea is still germinating somewhere inside of me. And that's the way that story works. That's the way that teaching should work. As Alvaro said, it's giving, it's putting ourselves into the students in a way. And it's a lasting impact. But you don't always see it. We all have our chores that we have at home. My favorite is sweeping. Because when you sweep the floor, you can see the dirt and the dust, and you see it collect, and you can put it into the waste bin, and it's all gone. And I can see the results right there. Teaching is not like that. Teaching, you don't see the fruits right away. Again, every once in a while, you will see it. An alum comes back and says, "I really, your class was great," or whatever. But it's even that. You're not seeing the full fruit of what you're actually doing when you do it well. The joys, though, of this, even though it's almost an intellectual joy rather than a seen and an experienced joy of teaching the boys in the way of a storyteller, is that we're forming their moral imagination. As Al mentioned yesterday, we can't see this job. I mean, if we want to think about the profession of teaching as I want to be an English teacher, hard stop. Well, okay, I mean, go get your English degree, and if you want to be a teacher to the full extent, it's a much bigger challenge. That's a much harder challenge. And we're not just teaching them good stories. We're not just teaching them literature. We're teaching their hearts. We're teaching their will. And stories are such an incredible way to do that. I know I'm sure a lot of Lord of the Rings fans here as we are at the Heights. And there's a great scene, when Strider, who is Aragorn, the future king, takes the hobbits who he's leading through, and you're trying to evade the Nazgul, and he takes them up to an old abandoned post called Weathertop, and the Nazgul are kind of out there somewhere, and the hobbits are scared out of their mind. And he tells them a story. Well, he sings a song, which is a story. He tells them the story of Beren and Luthien. And it ends, it's this heroic tale and romance and difficulty and trial, and then they end sorrowless. And it brings comfort to the hobbits in that desperate moment. And that's another thing. When I say moral imagination, it's not just Aesop's fables. We're teaching them a moral, and we are giving them virtue. Like we've got this injection of virtue that we can give them, but it's comfort to our human condition, which is difficult. There's actually another book called The Uses of Enchantment, which I would recommend, and it's written by a psychologist who talks about the importance of fairy tales. And his work dealing with troubled and afflicted psychological children who have gone through really traumatic experiences in their life, and how fairy tales have been part of their medicine to healing. It's fascinating. The third task that I'll talk about is that of an adventure guide. And again, sort of in the figurative realm here, but not always. We do take fourth graders up Old Rag, and we do take juniors swimming, half a mile across the Severn River to St. Clements Island. There are adventures that you should be hopefully taking your students on outside of the class. But even as a teacher inside the classroom, to just have in your mind the image of leading them on an adventure. And the operative word there being leading them. You're with them. Too often, the dynamic develops in a classroom where the teacher is this sort of despotic deliverer of information. And there's this wide chasm between the teacher and the students. And the students know it. And that gap, that chasm, it keeps all the actual knowledge transfer from happening. Rather, if we can make it such that we are in the trenches with them, we are leading them on this expedition. And again, I know I'm not getting super practical right now, but that can inform, even if we just take that image into the classroom, that can inform how we intonate a sentence, how we speak to them, how we look at them. If they get the sense that I am Mr. Know-It-All up here at the top, divulging my wisdom, and you better do it or else, that'll work for 2 or 3 of the students, and you'll have a really hard time with classroom management. But if you can give them the sense that you're in it with them by, every little thing of when even giving them hard work, it's not, I want to punish you with this work, but rather, look at this challenge. I know you can do it. Let's see you do it. Again, I keep talking about this trip up Old Rag, but there at a certain point, the trail turns from mud to complete rock, and you're bouldering up to the summit. And at a certain point, there's a little crevice that you need to, jump over. It's very small, but it's deep. And so there's a mental game that goes in, especially with some of these 9-year-olds, and you could see, I'm jumping ahead to the joys here, but you can see the fear and looking down at this crevice, and then the leap and the look of just supreme joy and pride on their face of having accomplished something difficult, having overcome their fear. How can we harness that in the classroom? Again, it could be just the way that we're speaking to them, the way that we're working together with them. The challenges to this are quite a few, but one that comes to mind is that the profession of teaching, while I'm kind of making it sound a little romantic here of being an adventure guide, is full of mundane, tedious tasks. I just finished grading 70 exams, mid-year exams of my juniors, and each one took a little bit over 15 minutes. That gets really tedious. You're not doing that in one sitting. You need, as a teacher, if you're going to have this sort of grand delivery of being an outdoorsman and a guide and a storyteller, you got to do the little things right. You got to show up on time. You've got to plan out your classes well. You've got to do the duties that you're assigned, even when no one sees or there's no, boss or someone overhead who's going to be watching. The little things are hard because they're tedious, and there's many of them in a school, especially, private schools typically, where we're, again, wearing many hats. But I think we kind of get the wrong sense of teaching sometimes, partly from Hollywood, right? I mean, we think like, we all know what the bad teacher looks like, but the good teacher looks like Robin Williams jumping on a desk. And that's what it has to be, right? No, you have to be this crazy entertainer and spontaneous all the time. And, spontaneity is a byproduct of structure. You need to avoid both as your unbreakable norms. If you are just structure all the time, well, you're going to be boring. If you just come in trying to shoot spontaneity all the time, well, they might enjoy that because you're telling all kinds of stories that have nothing to do with what you're actually teaching. But they'll know he's not really good at his job. He's not really teaching us this class. And they'll kind of, and it'll wear out. So structure is what is necessary, and that's tedious. Lesson planning is not fun. But those little things are necessary, and that's part of the challenge there. The joys here, though, of being an adventure guide, of really being in the trenches, if we can adjust that dynamic from me up here and you down there to I'm in it with you, the joys are that pride on their faces when you see the fourth grader jumping over the crevice. There's one of my favorite books is The Road by Cormac McCarthy. It's actually being taught here in the high school. And fair warning, sometimes when I recommend this book to people, they get really mad at me because it's really dark and it's a tough book. But I do recommend it still because it's one of the most beautiful father-son relationships I've ever come across in literature. And without giving too many spoilers, the father is leading this son through a basically post-apocalyptic world where they are being attacked on all sides and trying to avoid these really bad people. And not a lot of good things are happening. The boy, don't know how old he is, probably about 8, and the father's never named. But I want to read just this quick section here where the boy looked down the road. The dad says, "I want you to tell me what's going on." He shook his head. "Look at me," the man said. He turned and looked. He looked like he'd been crying. "Just tell me. We would never kill anybody, right?" "No, of course not. Even if we were starving?" "We are starving." "You said we weren't." "I said we weren't dying. I didn't say we weren't starving." "But we wouldn't, right?" "No, we wouldn't." "No matter what?" "No, no matter what." "Because we're the good guys?" "Yes." "And we're carrying the fire?" "Yes, we're carrying the fire." "Okay." This idea runs through the book of carrying the fire, and I think that's an awesome image for us as teachers. Carrying the fire. And this he uses and talks to the boy about we are the ones who, as Alvaro was talking, transmitting this culture, protectors of this culture, stalwarts of this culture, bringing it and keeping it alive like a fire, like we protect a fire and give it and bring it. It gives warmth. It gives light. It gives hope. And so our students, even if they don't let us know, even if they don't show it, there is fear. There is insecurity. It's not as drastic as being killed in the road, but there's plenty of fear. Anyone who teaches teenagers or has teenagers know there's lots of insecurity. There's lots of fear. And what we can do, what they want, and again, getting back to you won't see the fruit. They won't let you know this, but they want us to put a figurative arm around them and say, "I got you. We're in this together, and it's going to be okay." And that's, if we can develop that relationship in a classroom, so many good things happen. Finally, the task of being a friend. Now, I don't mean buddy, and I don't mean a bro. I don't mean chum with our students, because that can be devastating. From the standpoint of the teacher, wanting their good, liking them, as Alvaro mentioned yesterday, not just loving them, but liking them, but wanting their good. From their standpoint, them knowing that we want their good. Right, there's a line from Atticus Finch from To Kill a Mockingbird when he's explaining to his brother how he teaches his children, particularly Scout, his daughter. And he has the sentence where he says, "She knows, I know, she tries." I'll always remember that sentence because I think it's so important for teaching. She knows, I know, she tries. It's not just, I know she tries. It's not just she tries. It's that she knows that I know that she tries. In the way that I'm acting, in the way that I'm speaking, I'm communicating to her, tap on the back. Good job. Keep up the good fight. I know you're trying. That encouragement. That's the attitude of a friend. And additionally, from their standpoint, they should want to be around you. And as a teacher, again, kind of getting away from this dynamic of separation, but rather connection. The challenges here are twofold. One, they know right away if you don't like them. They know right away if you don't want to be around them. Whether they're 9 or whether they're 18, they know right away, and they're very sensitive to it. And so we can't have a day off. We can't, as Alvaro said, I've heard this a million times. Well, I love him, but I don't like him. It doesn't cut it. You need to spend the time to get to like him. We all have had the punching the clock teachers. The ones we know, they're just in there, they're doing their job, and as soon as they're out of the classroom, they're walking down the hallway, and they could care less about, who they run into or the people that they just chatted. We also remember those teachers who stuck around and chatted with us a little bit after class, not just because we were brown-nosing, but because we liked being around them. And we sensed that they wanted to be around us too. I'll never forget one of my best teachers, Jim Stenson, just hanging around during break time. We had this great deck on this classroom that doesn't exist here anymore. And he would just smoke his pipe, but no other teachers around. And I'm sure they were all, having a get-together in the faculty lounge during break, but he was there with the 7th grade and just chatting with us, right? Smoking his pipe, chatting, and we loved it. And we wanted to be around him. That's the mark of a good teacher. But the challenge is that if they think you want to be around them, they want to make you one of their own. And so the temptation and the tendency to become kind of chummy and broy with them is there. And that is a little bit of a dance, and something you probably only have to learn through experience of how to establish that. But that's a challenge. And that's one thing I would say in my guiding of my teachers that is universal. They either come in too strong or they come in too friendly. And then there begins this roller coaster of back and forth correcting and recorrecting until they find a happy medium. It happens almost with every new teacher. Rarely do they nail the golden mean right off the bat. But it's something to shoot for, and it's possible, but there are those extremes that you want to avoid. The fact is that this is when it really gets fun. When you really see a student. And again, this can take time. It's easy to say I love a student, in the abstract. This is a section from, just a quick section from Helen Keller's autobiography that I just recently read, and this is the kind of beginning of the moment where she really turns at the beginning. She explains, "I had felt angry and bitter for weeks, and now I felt tired and quiet. I did not know what the future would bring to me. I felt someone coming toward me. I thought it was my mother and stretched out my hand. Someone took it, and then I was caught up and held close in the arms of the person who had come to reveal everything to me, and more important than that, to love me." I'm talking about Aunt Sullivan, her famous teacher, of course. But what a sentence this is. The person who had come to reveal everything to me, and more important than that, to love me. This was a woman who was going to show her the world. But that wasn't important. It wasn't as important as the love that she immediately started off with. This connection. And of course, she was not only the teacher, but a lifelong friend. We have to take the time to see the individual souls in front of us We're teaching a class, we're teaching math, we're teaching English. No, I'm teaching John and Nathan and Phil and Stephen. I have individuals in my charge, and those souls are the ones that are really my task. How do we discern whether we have a vocation to teach? Alvaro talked about this a little bit yesterday. I'm just going to kind of try to drill down a little bit more. Again, keeping in mind that there's no way for me to stand here and tell you whether it's yes or no. Pope Paul VI, talking about vocation, says that it is a painful appeal, a voice that is both unsettling and calming at the same time, a gentle and imperious voice, a bothersome and yet loving voice. Bothersome and yet loving voice. Well, you're here, so you've probably heard that voice to some extent, which doesn't mean that all of you have a vocation to teach necessarily, but it's moving you in some direction. And what you're going to hear at this conference can help. You can look and think about and meditate on some of the aspects that I've talked about and that the others will talk about. Does that excite me? And those challenges, are those things I can stomach? Do those things sound like things that I can handle? That will certainly be helpful. But as Alvaro mentioned yesterday, there's going to be nothing like the experience. Nothing like the experience of, imagine taking driver's ed and, then getting your license and saying, I can drive, and you've never done a minute behind the wheel. This is a job, almost more than others, where you got to get in and just start doing it. And during that process, you'll have a lot of, hopefully, supervision by your supervisor and guidance, and you will be getting clearer by the day. I know Alvaro mentioned 2 to 3 years. I think by year 2, you're going to know. Some guys asked me last night, when did I know that I wanted to be a teacher? I never wanted to be a teacher. I was studying for my LSATs my senior year of college, and Alvaro, who had just recently become headmaster, called me and said, hey, why don't you, come interview? And, I guess I could say that was the spark, but it was really just, okay. I was getting married, and maybe I'll do that, and I'll take the LSATs, I'll study for the LSATs while I'm teaching. A move that a number of guys have done here before, and then I'll go off and get a real job. And that was my thinking, and we were engaged at the time, and so getting married and that. Okay. And I remember it was towards the end of my first year, and every day I would come home with stories. I would tell my wife just stories. The dinner table would just be full of stories I was telling them about the boys I was teaching. I was teaching 3rd grade homeroom. And I think it was at the end of my first year when I said, honey, I think I love this. And I think I'm pretty good at it. I think I'm okay. I'm obviously got a long way to go, but if you're loving it, that's one of the things I ask my new teachers. Are you laughing with your students? Because if you are, that's a real sign that you love this job. That you're not only able to say sort of abstractly, oh yeah, this is a good job, but no, I actively and I truly love this. This is fun. Notwithstanding all the challenges that are there, right? Again, not a walk in the park. I think another way, in addition to experience, is relying on the feedback from your friends and family, especially those that are most close to you. When I came home and I told my wife that, I said, I really think I'm loving this. only retrospectively do I see the wheel is turning in the back of her mind thinking, okay, I thought I was marrying a lawyer. But to her credit, she was the number one supporter of that move and saying, well, we'll make it work. But let's keep doing it. Keep doing it as long as you're loving it. And then I also had a really good mentor. I already mentioned him, Father Arnie Panula, who was the one who planted the seeds. There's no surprise that he continued to foster that spark inside of me. But remember the moment where Samuel, in the book of Samuel, was hearing God speak to him, and he didn't know it. And he kept going to Eli, the priest, and saying, what, are you calling me? Are you calling me? And it was only, after a couple times that Eli realized, oh, you are actually, you're getting that voice. Eddie Smith, one of the earlier teachers of the Heights, used to call it hearing the voices, whatever the heck that means. But, you're hearing it. You guys have started to hear the voices. And a mentor like the priest Eli can help bring you to see it more clearly, because he's almost like an editor. He's not in your shoes. Another thing to go through in your mind and in your discernment is thinking about, do I have the basic gifts that a teacher needs? It's not anybody can do this and, jump in. I gave a talk on some of the attributes that I think most important a few years ago. You can probably look it up and find it on the forum. But just a couple here in terms of technical gifts, but a teacher is a public speaker. That's often forgotten. Unless you're dealing with one or two students, you are speaking to a group. And so it's not that you have to be so experienced and proficient in this already, because again, it can be something that you learn. But if it's a dread fear of yours, that might be an indicator that this might not be a vocation for you. Two attributes I do want to mention just a little bit more in depth, though, that are absolutely necessary for the teaching profession, and that is learning and humility. So not necessarily technical gifts. Learning in two senses, in the noun, as a noun, and as a present progressive verb. Learning, we have to have received learning. We have to have gotten to a point where we have some knowledge to give. It's not divulging, it's not filling up cups, I know, but we need to have some sort of, we're in the trenches with them, but we're not side by side, we're not peers, we're leaders, we're ahead of them. And so we're like trackers walking through a forest and say, oh, don't step here. We know the forest better than the guys who are going in the forest with us. So there needs to be some learning in the subject that you're teaching for sure. But learning as a present progressive verb, you need, as a teacher, to continually be learning. You need to be a student. And you need to have enough learning to know that you want to keep learning. And you want to be a lifelong learner, because the students will see that. And that's one of the things that it will not only aid your lesson plans and your delivery, but it'll also be one of the things that inspires your students that you're teaching. And humility, it's just, I don't know if I want to say it's the most important virtue for a teacher, but if you think of humility, we're thinking of three things in my mind. One being vulnerable, having vulnerability in the classroom. Two, having a sense of humor. And three, being confident. Right? Those are the marks of humility in my mind. Think back right now, go into your memory banks and picture your best teachers. Each of us has two or three. I bet there's not a single one in our collective memory banks that was insecure and fearful and anxious or haughty, right? These were teachers who were comfortable, and they were able to let down some walls and, again, be themselves. There's a lot of overlap here in my talk, right? Be themselves. Be a friend. Let them in to their space a little bit. Even just to tell a good joke, you're letting yourself out there a little bit, not just as a loudmouth talker, but as one of, someone who wants to connect with them. Sense of humor, not that you're a comedian all the time or an entertainer, but you can let some things slide. You can laugh at them. You can laugh with them. You can laugh at yourself. Huge characteristics of being a teacher. So I would mention those two. Remember, we're coming up on the Epiphany, and the two groups that were there at the stable were the learned and the humble, right? The Magi and the shepherds. So maybe a lesson for us. To finish up here, go out and teach all nations, says our Lord at the end of the Gospel of Matthew. Teach what, Lord? Teach them truth, capital T. Teach them goodness. Teach them beauty. We'll finish with just a little bit longer of a reading, if you'll bear with me, from Helen Keller's autobiography. This is the moment that really, it's that defining moment in the beginning of her education. My teacher put my hand into the water. They came over to a well. As it poured, as the cool stream poured over one of my hands, she spelled into the other the word water. First slowly, then rapidly. I stood still. My whole attention was fixed on the motion of her fingers. Suddenly, I seemed to remember something I had forgotten. I felt a thrill of returning thought. Somehow, the mystery of language was revealed to me. I knew then that water meant that wonderful, cool something that was pouring over my hand. Remember, she was blind and deaf. That living word awakened my soul and set it free. I left the well house, eager to learn. Everything had a name, and with each name a new idea came. As we went back to the house, everything that I touched seemed to be full of life. That was because I saw everything with the strange new sight that had come to me. We're teaching our students how to see. That's what we're doing. And they're not physically blind most of the time, but I would suggest that there is a moral blindness rampant in our society, and that most of our students, even a lot of the students who grow up in good Christian families, are suffering from. And we are teaching them how to see reality. And all of us have that vocation. It's a wonderful vocation to be able to do it directly, to be able to do it professionally, to be able to do it every day. And remember the hobbits, when they come back after the whole thing is done, they have destroyed the ring, and Sauron's been defeated, and Aragorn is back on the kingdom, and you think game over, victory, and they come back and their home is completely under attack, and the Shire, their home, has been completely raided and overrun. And Gandalf leaves them and offers no help. And Frodo and Sam are, "Look, you have to come with us. You have to help us." And Gandalf says, "You must settle its affairs on your own. That is what you have been trained for." The whole story was an education. The whole time, it wasn't just defeat the Sauron. That was their upbringing. That was their education. And all those things, all those people along the way were teachers, all those experiences were teaching moments. And we, in the trenches, as professionals, get to do that with 20, 30, 40, 50, 100, however many students you teach every day. It's an easy job to do poorly. It's a difficult job to do really well, but if you do, I don't think there's a single more rewarding job out there. So thanks for your time. I look forward to answering some of your questions later on today.